Hey guys, we're sticking with aircraft this week, and this time we're going to be looking at something a little unusual. Um, if you have built a lot of aircraft kits, you'll know typical scales for them are 132nd, 148th, and 172nd. Well, today we're going to be looking at a 135th scale, BF109G-6 from Border Models. Let's open her on up and take a look. Now, one thing with this particular boxing, it does include a random included set of extras. We'll look at those after we get through the main kit parts. So, starting off, and in an interesting move, they've given us the entirety of this sprue, both in clear and in typical gray plastic. I have never seen a kit manufacturer do this. So what this means is not only do we have our clear canopy parts, but we now also have an extra set that we can use for masking, and that surprisingly is a nice addition that I never thought I would ever want or need, but I kind of now want it on all my kits. As being able to just temporarily attach this, not have to worry and deal with masking off all the areas I typically have to deal with and worry, is a godsend. Now, obviously, you'd still need to mask off and paint these to assemble it, but being able just to quickly attach that, lay down your coat of paint, and not worry as much, so that you can then take more time and do a better job masking this and not having to worry, and also not have to worry about, messing it up and you're temporarily attaching it, dealing with all that. Fantastic. Now, that's a surprising addition I never thought I'd need. Now, it's also nice that we do get the cowling panels as well in clear, so that, let's say you want to do up the engine as best you can and still want it visible, you have the option to do that with those. It's a nice inclusion. Also in this sprue, we do get the underwing cannon pods included, which is one of the things about this kit that is quite impressive, that they do give you a lot of options right out the gate. Now, continuing on, we have our two fuselage halves. Again, my hand to give you a sense of scale on this thing. Riveting detail is phenomenal. I really can't stress that enough. I do, at least on my copy, there's a sort of roughness to the plastic surface. I don't know how much of that will disappear once I put a coat of primer down, but that is something to be aware of. You might want to just take a very high grit, at least 2000, and just give it a once over. Flipping the parts over, one thing I did notice, at least on mine, it does have some pretty nasty ejector pin marks in the cockpit area, so that will require some cleaning up, as well as in a couple of the other parts. So, that is a bit of a disappointment. Other than that, since this is a larger scale, you do get a lot of detail in all of these parts, and I also like that they do have the slats as separate parts, so you can pose them should you choose to. Moving on, we've got some of the weapons, including the wing cannon, or excuse me, the engine cannon, apologies, as well as our gear bay doors with mains, parts of the rudder, and parts of the engine, as well as a few other odds and end parts. Again, a lot of detail right out of the bat on all of these parts. And what's nice also, they did open up the cannon parts. Continuing, we got more control surfaces. Again, they've done all of them as being posable, which I like. I like when we're given options. That's always a good thing. Continuing on, we now get into our props as well as the underwing ordnance and the support structure for them. We're also given the option for 2 rocket launchers and an included plastic rocket. Moving on to the wing halves, again, hand for scale. This is a nicely sized kit. Much like the fuselage halves, similar type of surface detailing, very sharp, very crisp, nicely in scale. Just has this almost a rough texture to it, so be aware of that. More ailerons and a separate control surface for the tail. Overall, very nice. You do get some internal details in here as well, but obviously not as much. Thankfully, the ejector pins are in areas that aren't going to be seen, so you don't have to worry about cleaning them up. And then lastly, as far as the main sprues go, we've got all of our cockpit and our engine details, which gives you the full ability to build up the engine. Now, this is both good and bad, as fortunately some of it you're going to have to build up in order to attach both the nose cannon and the propeller. I'm not a fan when they do this, as it does add to your workload, but more often than not, there are some ways you can probably figure out some cheats to building it. Am impressed by the instrument panel. They did a very nice job of rendering it just by the kit parts themselves. So that is an area you can probably skimp a little and get away with not having to do too much aftermarket there, should you choose. We also get one little edge fret for a couple other little detail parts. Overall, that's more secondary to the rest of the build. Now, as I mentioned before, this kit is the limited edition, which does include a set of additional detail parts randomly assorted. And for mine, got the Scarface pilot. I open this up. It also came with a set of metal rockets, which is a nice inclusion. Personally would have preferred the metal prop, as I think just aesthetically that's a better pull, or even just the seatbelt photo etch, even though I do plan to utilize the figure. I've kept it in here just to keep some little detail parts all together, but they did do a really good job with the figures. If this is, I would say, a good example of what they're doing, fantastic. These are more than easily usable, and I cannot recommend them enough. And if it wasn't for the fact they were in 35th scale, I would say get it and save the figure for when you need it, regardless of what kit you go with. The decals are nice, sharp, crisp. However, they don't include any instructions for the decal options that are included in here. I checked their website. I checked a lot of the normal internet sources. Found nothing. So that is a real disappointment. So I would say upside, you get a chance to take some artistic license and sort of do your own thing, but it would have been nice had they given you some instruction guidance. Now, if we move on to the main decals, very nicely done. All the colors are nice, bright, sharp. Blacks are black, whites are white. I really look forward to getting these down and using them. No complaints there. Now, let's move on to the instructions. Now, because of the size of this thing, and you can tell by the part breakdown, this is a complicated kit. This is just a small sampling of what it's going to take just to build up the engine. And, obviously, if you're wanting to do a lot of detailed builds, dioramas, vignettes, this is a great base, especially since there's a lot of 35th scale stuff already out there. So you've got a lot of options. Now, obviously, we're going to have to start by building up the engine, which is going to take a lot of time. So just go slow. Make sure you don't miss anything. We then move into building up the cockpit. Again, and decently detailed, so just take your time, go slow. And before we end up mating the two and adding the two machine guns, and then starting to detail up the cockpit sidewalls as well. I do like how they've detailed the instruction sheet, so you can see clearly where everything goes, what you got to do. Only complaint is they don't give you the paint key here. We'll see in a minute. Then once we got all that done, it's finally time to button up the two fuselage halves for bringing the cowling together. Unfortunately, they don't include the support bars for the cowling, so that is something to be aware of. You're going to have to scratch build your own. Would have been nice had they included that, just for completeness. We then move on to the wheels, and starting on the wings. Now, an interesting note, and we'll see again later in the marking options. It specifically here says that Hartmann's fighter doesn't utilize the gun pods. However, if you look in the marking instructions, it shows the aircraft with them. So that's something, double check your sources on before you build. Make sure the aircraft you're building to represent actually has the equipment that you're building. So once you've decided on what underwing armament you can go with, or even if you are or not, and then build those up as well as our rocket pods. And then start attaching those on before adding it to the fuselage. Personally, I would say hold off adding those until you're doing your finishing touches, just because it's going to be really easy to knock those off. And yeah, that's not going to be fun. But from this point on, it's pretty much the typical aircraft build. If you built one, you built them all. So now on to the painting options. This is where this kit suffers the most. As much like that amusing kit we looked at a few weeks ago, it gives you in this particular style. I'm not at all a fan of it. And while I do like that they give this extra detailing, I would prefer if they included that during the build sequence, because you're going to miss it if you don't. I guarantee you, it's far too easy. It's better just to make sure you're going with what needs to be colored what on the specific parts. So in this regard, I would say definitely check your references and check them carefully. Now, I do like, however, they do give you a lot of options. So in total, we have a number, about a little more than half a dozen plus different aircraft you can build. So that's another good thing. So overall, I will give Border this, if nothing else. Doing this in 35th scale is a gamble, and it's one I think will ultimately pay off. I already know they've done at least the Stuka. I cannot recall if they're doing it, have announced any other ones yet. But if this is what they're going to be doing in terms of quality, power to them, they've done a really great job. I do think there are some areas where they can improve, namely in the instructions and the paint guide, and making sure some of the finish on the larger parts isn't as grainy. But overall, they give you a tremendous amount of detail. I also, while I'm not super thrilled with the gotcha nature of the random parts, I do like the parts that they've given. I think their sculpting on their figures is fantastic. Well worth it. I just wish they include some additional instructions for those. I can understand why they didn't, since it is random. That does make it a little hard, but they could at least include something online, because prior to recording this video, I went looking, could find nothing. So that was a little disappointing. But as I said, it's a nice little kit. It is complicated, so definitely not one I'd recommend for first timers, but with a little patience, this is one that'll build up quite nicely, and definitely can see it being paired with armor models since it is in 35th scale. So that was a look at Borders 1/35th scale BF109G-6. Nice little kit with a lot of options available to you. So until next time.